The day a billionaire noticed me, I was carrying someone else's dirty dishes. The crystal tray felt heavier with every step I took across the ballroom. Maybe it was the weight. Maybe it was the fact that I hadn't slept more than 4 hours a night all week. Or maybe it was because every person in that room seemed to belong there except me. The charity gala occupied the entire east wing of the Blackwood Grand Hotel, a place so luxurious that even the chandeliers looked expensive enough to have their own security detail. Golden light spilled across marble floors polished to a mirror shine. Men in tailored suits laughed over glasses of imported whiskey. Women draped in diamonds exchanged stories about vacation homes and private islands. And then there was me, Grace Miller, 24 years old, maid by day, banquet server by night, daughter of a woman whose medical bills sat stacked on our kitchen table like silent threats. I adjusted the cuff of my black uniform and tightened my grip on the tray. Table 7 needs champagne, my supervisor snapped as she rushed past me. And stay out of sight this time. Stay out of sight. I almost laughed. That had been my specialty my entire life. Invisible people rarely caused trouble. Invisible people rarely got noticed. Invisible people survived. I moved through the crowd carefully, weaving between conversations that sounded like they belonged to another planet. The scent of expensive perfume mixed with fresh flowers and polished wood. Somewhere in the distance, a string quartet played softly. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect. The kind of perfect that made people like me feel like intruders. I delivered the drinks and turned toward the service entrance when a sharp voice stopped me. "Excuse me." I froze. A woman in a silver evening gown stood near one of the VIP tables. Her smile looked pleasant from a distance. Up close, it felt cold. "You're blocking the photographer." Heat climbed into my face. I immediately stepped aside. "Sorry, ma'am." She looked me up and down. Not at my face. At my uniform. At the tray in my hands. At everything that reminded her exactly who I was. Staff should use the back corridors. The people around her chuckled politely. Not cruelly. Somehow that felt worse. I lowered my eyes and started walking again. My shoes clicked softly against the marble floor. 1 step. 2 steps. 3. Then I heard another voice. Deep. Calm. Powerful enough that conversations nearby seemed to pause on their own. Why? The room didn't go silent. Not completely. But something shifted. I turned before I could stop myself. A tall man stood near the entrance of the ballroom. Dark navy suit. Broad shoulders. Sharp features. The kind of presence that made people straighten their posture without realizing it. Ethan Blackwood. I knew who he was instantly. Everyone did. Billionaire. Founder. CEO. The man whose name sat above skyscrapers and hospital wings and scholarship programs. The man who owned the hotel. The woman blinked. "Excuse me." Ethan's gaze remained fixed on her. Why should she use the back corridors? Nobody answered. Even from 30 feet away, I could feel the tension spreading through the room. His expression never changed. "She works here," the woman finally said. Ethan glanced toward me. Just once. Just long enough for those steel blue eyes to meet mine. "So do hundreds of people," he replied. "That doesn't make them invisible." My breath caught. The woman laughed nervously. Others quickly joined her. The moment passed. Conversations resumed. Music continued. But something inside me felt different. For the first time all evening, someone had looked directly at me instead of through me. Ethan Blackwood turned away and disappeared into the crowd. Yet as I stood there holding a tray of empty glasses, I couldn't shake the feeling that the night had just changed. And I had no idea that before it ended, the most powerful man in the room would learn my name. The city looked different after midnight. The glittering skyline that tourists photographed from observation decks became something quieter from the window of a crowded bus. I rested my forehead against the cool glass and watched reflections slide across the dark streets as we moved downtown. Somewhere behind those towers, Ethan Blackwood was probably finishing meetings worth more money than I would earn in 10 lifetimes. Meanwhile, I was counting the dollars left in my checking account and calculating whether I could afford my mother's next prescription refill before Friday. The contrast should have bothered me. Instead, I felt exhausted. By the time I stepped off the bus, the air carried the sharp chill of early spring. My apartment building stood between a laundromat and a corner grocery store that never seemed to close. The brick exterior was faded. The front steps creaked. The hallway lights flickered. But it was home. I climbed 3 flights of stairs and unlocked the door as quietly as possible. The familiar scent of chamomile tea greeted me immediately. My mother was asleep on the couch. The television glowed softly in the corner of the room, still playing a late-night game show she had probably fallen asleep watching. A folded blanket rested across her lap. Her silver hair caught the light from the screen. For a moment, I simply stood there looking at her. Every extra shift, every sore muscle, every hour of lost sleep suddenly felt worth it. I moved carefully through the apartment and picked up the unopened envelopes scattered across the coffee table. Medical bills, insurance statements, payment reminders, the usual collection. I stacked them neatly and placed them inside a drawer before she could see them in the morning. Worry had become heavy enough without adding more weight. Then I noticed something unusual. A small white envelope sat by itself near the lamp. My name was written across the front in elegant handwriting. Grace. No return address. No stamp. Confused, I opened it. Inside was a simple card. Nothing fancy. No company logo. No signature. Just one sentence. Your kindness tonight did not go unnoticed. I stared at the words for several seconds. My first thought was that one of the event guests had left it behind. My second thought was impossible to ignore. Those steel blue eyes. The calm voice. The moment in the ballroom. Ethan Blackwood. I immediately shook my head. That was ridiculous. People like him did not send notes to people like me. Still, my pulse quickened as I turned the card over. Nothing else was written there. No explanation. No clue. Just that single sentence. I slipped the card back into the envelope and tucked it into my bag. Tomorrow would be another long day. Another shift. Another struggle to keep everything together. Yet as I stood in the dark apartment listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sounds of traffic outside, I could not shake the strange feeling that something had shifted. Like a door I had never noticed before had quietly opened somewhere in the distance. And for reasons I could not explain, I had the feeling that the next time I saw Ethan Blackwood, he would know my name. By 6 o'clock the next morning, the city was already awake. Steam rose from street vents. Taxi horns echoed between buildings. People hurried past each other carrying coffee cups and unfinished conversations. I stood at a bus stop with the mysterious envelope still tucked inside my bag, trying to convince myself it did not matter. It should not have mattered. I had rent to worry about. Medical bills. A refrigerator that sounded like it was preparing for retirement. Yet my thoughts kept drifting back to those 7 words. Your kindness tonight did not go unnoticed. The bus arrived with a hiss of brakes. 20 minutes later, I stepped through the employee entrance of Blackwood Manor. Calling it a house felt ridiculous. The estate occupied nearly 5 acres on the edge of the city. Stone walls, iron gates, perfect gardens that somehow looked untouched by weather or time. I spent most mornings cleaning guest suites that were larger than my entire apartment. Usually, the routine helped me stop thinking. Not today. Around 11 o'clock, I was polishing a bookshelf in one of the private sitting rooms when the sound of hurried footsteps broke the silence. 2 staff members rushed past the doorway. Their expressions looked tense. A third employee appeared moments later carrying a glass of water. Something was happening. Curiosity got the better of me. I stepped into the hallway. What is going on? I asked quietly. The house manager barely slowed down. Mr. Blackwood is not feeling well. The physician is on the way. My stomach tightened unexpectedly. Not because I knew him. I did not. But the image of him standing in that ballroom returned instantly. Calm, confident, untouchable. People like Ethan Blackwood were not supposed to have bad days. They certainly were not supposed to look human. The hallway outside his private office had become unusually busy. Staff moved carefully, speaking in lowered voices. I should have gone back to work. Instead, I noticed something nobody else seemed to see. A silver medication case sat unopened on a nearby table. The label attached to it carried instructions. Take immediately. The seal had never been broken. Without thinking, I picked it up. One of the assistants looked relieved. Thank goodness. We have been looking for that. She pushed the case into my hands. Can you take it inside? Before I could answer, she disappeared down the corridor. I stared at the closed office door. Every instinct told me to hand the case to someone else. Then I remembered my mother. The countless times medication had arrived a few minutes too late because people assumed someone else would handle it. I knocked softly. No answer. After a moment, I pushed the door open. Ethan sat behind an enormous desk facing floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. His jacket had been removed. The morning sunlight illuminated faint signs of exhaustion beneath his eyes. For the first time, he did not look like a billionaire. He looked like a man who had not rested in far too long. He glanced up as I entered. Recognition flashed across his face immediately. Then his gaze shifted toward the silver case in my hands. "You found it," he said quietly. I nodded and placed it on the desk. It looked important. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then a faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Grace Miller," he said. My heart skipped a beat. "You remembered my name." His eyes held mine. I make it a habit to remember people who help others when nobody is watching. I stood there for a second longer than I should have. The office suddenly felt too quiet. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city continued moving as if nothing had changed. But inside that room, my pulse had become impossible to ignore. Ethan Blackwood knew my name. Not because it was printed on a payroll file. Not because someone had introduced us. He remembered it. I cleared my throat and took a small step backward. I should get back to work. The words sounded awkward the moment they left my mouth. Ethan leaned back slightly in his chair, studying me with the same calm focus that had unsettled me since the gala. "Of course." His voice remained even. "Thank you for bringing that to me." I nodded and turned toward the door. Halfway there, his voice stopped me again. "Grace." I looked over my shoulder. "Yes." "Did your mother enjoy the flowers?" My breath caught. The world seemed to pause. "Flowers." Yesterday morning, a bouquet of white lilies had arrived at our apartment with no sender listed on the card. My mother had spent half the day smiling at them. I had assumed they were from a church friend or one of her old co-workers. "Those were from you?" I asked quietly. Ethan looked almost amused. "I heard she likes lilies." I stared at him. "How?" "You mentioned them to another employee while setting up the ballroom." He said it like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. My mind struggled to process that. Out of hundreds of conversations he probably heard every week, he had remembered that one. Before I could respond, someone knocked sharply on the office door. A woman entered without waiting for permission. She looked elegant, confident, and perfectly dressed. Everything about her suggested wealth. Her eyes landed on me immediately, then on Ethan, then back to me. The silence lasted only a second, but it felt much longer. "I did not realize you were busy," she said. Ethan's expression did not change. "I am not." Something about her smile tightened. I lowered my gaze and moved toward the exit. "Excuse me." As I passed her, I felt her attention follow me all the way into the hallway. The door closed behind me. Only then did I release the breath I had been holding. The rest of the afternoon felt strange. Several employees glanced at me differently. One housekeeper asked if I had done something important. Another wanted to know why I had been inside Mr. Blackwood's private office. I answered honestly. I delivered medication. That was all. Yet the questions continued. By 5 o'clock, rumors had already begun spreading through the estate. I hated rumors. They had a way of growing larger than reality. As I gathered my cleaning supplies near the end of my shift, the house manager approached carrying a tablet. Her expression was unreadable. "Grace, I need you tomorrow morning at 8. "For cleaning?" I asked. "No." She glanced down at the screen. "Mr. Blackwood has requested that you join the household staff assigned directly to his private wing." My grip tightened around the handle of the supply cart. There must be some mistake. "There is no mistake." She looked at me carefully. The request came directly from him. My stomach dropped. Around me, conversation stopped. Several employees turned to stare. Suddenly the room felt much smaller. Because everyone in Blackwood Manor understood one thing. Ethan Blackwood never requested anyone. Until now. The next morning, I arrived 20 minutes early. Not because I wanted to impress anyone. I simply needed time to calm my nerves. Blackwood Manor looked different when the sun first touched the stone walls. The gardens glistened with dew. The fountains reflected pale gold light. Everything felt peaceful. Unfortunately, the same could not be said for the people inside. The moment I stepped through the employee entrance, conversation stopped. Eyes followed me across the room. Some curious, some suspicious, some openly annoyed. I kept my head down and focused on my work assignment. That strategy lasted exactly 12 minutes. "So you are Grace." The voice came from behind me. I turned to find 3 women standing near the grand staircase. They were not employees. That much was obvious. Designer handbags, perfect makeup, expensive jewelry, the kind of confidence money often created. The woman in the center smiled politely. It never reached her eyes. I have heard quite a lot about you. I forced a small smile. I hope nothing too interesting. Her friends exchanged glances. Actually, she said, it is very interesting. Ethan rarely notices anyone. There it was. The real subject. I should have expected it. Mr. Blackwood requested staff reassignment. I replied carefully. That is all. Of course. Her tone suggested she did not believe me for a second. Before the conversation could continue, the house manager appeared. Grace, Mr. Blackwood is ready for the morning briefing. Relief washed through me. Excuse me. I left immediately. The private wing occupied the quietest part of the estate. Fewer guests. Fewer interruptions. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the eastern gardens. Everything felt organized, precise, controlled. Much like Ethan himself. When I entered the sitting room, he stood near a window reviewing documents. Sunlight illuminated the sharp lines of his profile. He looked healthier than yesterday, though fatigue still lingered beneath the surface. Good morning, I said. He looked up. Good morning, Grace. The strange thing was how naturally he said my name now, as if he had known it for years. I set fresh coffee on the table and began organizing the room. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. The silence felt comfortable rather than awkward. Eventually, Ethan closed the folder in his hands. You seem distracted. I almost laughed. That obvious? Very. I hesitated, then decided honesty was easier. People are talking. One corner of his mouth lifted slightly. People always talk. About me. His expression became thoughtful. And does that bother you? I considered the question. Not usually, but I prefer earning attention rather than inheriting it. Something changed in his eyes. Respect, perhaps. Or surprise. That is a rare answer. Before I could respond, a knock interrupted us. The door opened. The elegant woman from earlier entered without waiting. Her smile appeared flawless. Ethan, your mother wants to finalize the guest list for Saturday. Then her gaze landed on me. Again. Oh, you are still here. The room suddenly felt colder. Ethan remained perfectly calm. Grace works here. The woman folded her arms lightly. Interesting. Because everyone seems to think she works only for you. Silence followed. I lowered my eyes and focused on the coffee tray, wishing I could disappear. But when I glanced up, Ethan was already looking directly at her. Then everyone is wasting a great deal of time discussing something that is none of their business. For the first time, the woman's smile faltered. And for the first time, I realized that whatever was happening around me was becoming much bigger than a simple reassignment. The rest of the week should have returned to normal. Instead, everything became more complicated. Not because Ethan treated me differently. If anything, he remained consistently professional. The problem was everyone else. Every glance lasted a little too long. Every conversation seemed to stop when I entered a room. Rumors moved through Blackwood Manor faster than sunlight through glass. By Thursday afternoon, I found myself grateful for the quiet of the private library. Dusting shelves was simple. Books never judged anyone. I was reaching for the top shelf when I noticed a leather folder resting on a reading table. It had probably been left behind after one of Ethan's meetings. My first instinct was to ignore it. My second was stronger. I picked it up to return it to his office. The folder opened slightly as I moved. A stack of papers slipped forward. Before I could stop myself, I saw a familiar address printed across the top page. My address. I froze. My heartbeat immediately accelerated. For a moment, I simply stared at the document. Then I realized it was not a financial report. It was a property assessment. The apartment building where my mother and I lived. Confused, I quickly closed the folder. I had no intention of reading anything else. 10 minutes later, I knocked on Ethan's office door. Come in. He sat behind his desk reviewing contracts. The late afternoon sunlight painted long shadows across the room. I placed the folder in front of him. I found this in the library. His eyes moved from the folder to my face. Then back again. Something thoughtful crossed his expression. Thank you. I hesitated. Can I ask a question? Of course. I took a breath. Why do you have documents about my apartment building? Silence settled between us. Ethan closed the folder slowly. For a second, I thought he might avoid answering. Instead, he folded his hands together. Because I recently learned the property owner plans to sell it. My stomach tightened. What? The building requires significant repairs. His voice remained calm. Several tenants would likely be forced to relocate. Images flashed through my mind instantly. My mother. The bills. The uncertainty. Starting over somewhere else. I lowered myself into the nearest chair before my legs decided to stop cooperating. Ethan watched quietly. You knew? It was not really a question. He nodded. I learned about it 3 days ago. And you were researching it? I was considering solutions. I stared at him. For me? For everyone who lives there. The answer came immediately, without hesitation. Somehow that made it even harder to process. Wealthy people often talked about helping communities. Very few actually spent their time reviewing building inspections and tenant reports. Ethan leaned forward slightly. Grace, may I ask you something? I nodded. If someone offered to pay every medical bill your mother has, would you accept? The question landed heavily. I looked down at my hands. The answer should have been obvious. It should have been yes. Yet the words never came. Finally, I shook my head. No. Ethan blinked once. Why? I lifted my eyes to meet his. Because I do not want charity. The room became very still. Then what do you want? I swallowed carefully. The answer had lived inside me for years. A fair chance. Something shifted in Ethan's expression. Not surprise. Not pity. Respect. Genuine respect. And as the silence stretched between us, I realized he was looking at me differently than before. Not as an employee. Not as someone who needed saving. But as someone he was trying to understand. For the rest of that evening, Ethan's question stayed with me. A fair chance. Such a simple phrase. Yet it felt more valuable than every promise I had ever heard. The bus ride home passed in a blur of streetlights and reflections. When I finally reached the apartment, I found my mother sitting by the window with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The vase of white lilies still occupied the center of the small table. Their scent filled the room. You look thoughtful, she said as soon as I stepped inside. I laughed softly. That obvious? To me, yes. Mothers notice things other people missed. I sat beside her and helped organize a stack of paperwork from the clinic. Insurance forms. Appointment reminders. Nothing exciting. Yet for the first time in weeks, she seemed lighter. Happier. Watching her smile reminded me why I worked so hard. The next morning, Blackwood Manor felt unusually busy. Staff hurried through hallways carrying floral arrangements and event schedules. Saturday's charity gala was only 2 days away. Guests would begin arriving soon. Around noon, I entered Ethan's office to deliver coffee and updated meeting notes. He stood near the window, staring out toward the gardens. His expression looked distant, almost distracted. Your schedule for tomorrow, I said, placing the folder on his desk. He nodded without looking away from the glass. Thank you. I started toward the door. Grace. I stopped. Yes. He turned. Do you know what most people ask me for? The question caught me off guard. I shook my head. Money. His answer came immediately. Investments. Connections. Favors. Opportunities. His gaze settled on mine. Sometimes all at once. I did not know what to say. Ethan walked back toward the desk. You were the first person who refused something before I even offered it. Heat touched my cheeks. I was not refusing help. No. A faint smile appeared. You were protecting your dignity. The room fell quiet. Outside, sunlight danced across the fountain beyond the windows. Ethan looked thoughtful again, as if he were replaying our conversation from yesterday. Before either of us could speak further, a sharp knock interrupted the moment. The house manager entered carrying several invitation samples. Mr. Blackwood, your mother would like final approval on the seating arrangements. Ethan nodded. I will review them shortly. Then she noticed me. Her eyes moved from Ethan to me and back again. Something unreadable crossed her expression before she left. By late afternoon, I realized the atmosphere inside the manor had shifted once more. Conversations stopped whenever I approached. 2 employees suddenly ended a discussion when they saw me. Even the guests seemed curious. Whatever rumors had started earlier were growing. That evening, as I organized documents in the library, I noticed a framed photograph resting on a side table. It showed Ethan standing beside an older man with similar eyes. His father, I assumed. The frame had been knocked slightly crooked. I reached over to straighten it. As I lifted it, something slipped from behind the picture and landed softly on the table. It was an old photograph, faded at the edges, at least 20 years old. I glanced down without thinking. Then my breath caught. Because standing beside Ethan's father in that photograph was a young woman whose face looked startlingly familiar. A woman who looked almost exactly like my mother. For several seconds, I could not move. The old photograph rested in my hands while the library around me seemed to fade into the background. The woman standing beside Ethan's father looked younger, maybe 25, but there was no mistaking her. The same eyes, the same smile, the same gentle expression I had seen every day of my life. My mother. I carefully turned the photograph over. Nothing was written on the back. No date, no names, just silence. Questions immediately filled my mind. How had my mother known the Blackwood family? Why had she never mentioned them? And why was this photograph hidden behind another frame? A sound in the hallway made me jump. I quickly slipped the picture back where I had found it and straightened the frame. My heart was still racing when I returned to work. The entire drive home felt endless. Rain tapped softly against the bus windows while city lights blurred into streaks of gold and white. By the time I unlocked our apartment door, I had already rehearsed a dozen different ways to ask the question. None of them felt right. My mother sat at the kitchen table sorting coupons and grocery receipts. The television played quietly in the background. Everything looked normal. Too normal. "You are home early," she said with a smile. I set my bag down slowly. "Mom, can I ask you something?" Her expression changed immediately. Mothers always knew when something mattered. "Of course." I sat across from her and tried to choose my words carefully. "Have you ever heard of the Blackwood family?" The color drained from her face so quickly that my stomach tightened. For a second, she simply stared at me. Then she lowered her eyes. "Where did you hear that name?" The answer frightened me more than if she had denied knowing them. "You know them." It was not a question. Silence stretched between us. Finally, she folded her hands together. "A very long time ago." My pulse quickened. "How long?" "Before you were born." I leaned forward. "Mom, what is going on?" She looked toward the window. Rain continued falling outside. "Some chapters of life are better left closed, Grace." I shook my head. "Not this one." Her eyes returned to mine. Sadness filled them. Deep sadness. The kind that came from carrying something for years. "The Blackwoods helped me once." I blinked. "Helped you?" She nodded slowly. "Your father and I were struggling. We lost almost everything after an accident at the company where he worked. Most people walked away." Her voice softened. "One person did not." My heart pounded louder. "Ethan's father?" She nodded again. "Richard Blackwood." The name felt heavy in the small apartment. I had never heard it before, yet somehow it already felt important. "What happened after that?" I asked. My mother looked down at her hands. "Something that changed both families forever." Before I could ask another question, a knock sounded at the apartment door. Sharp. Unexpected. We both looked up. Nobody visited this late. Another knock followed. Then a familiar voice came through the door. "Grace? It is Ethan. We need to talk." For a moment, nobody moved. The rain continued tapping against the apartment windows while my mother and I stared toward the door. Ethan's voice had been calm, but there was something urgent beneath it. Something I had never heard before. My mother rose first. Her expression had become impossible to read. I crossed the room and opened the door. Ethan stood in the hallway wearing a dark overcoat dampened by the rain. The hallway light cast soft shadows across his face. He looked tired, more tired than I had ever seen him. Yet his attention immediately found mine. Then it shifted toward my mother. The silence that followed felt strangely familiar, as if two people were looking at a memory instead of each other. "Margaret," Ethan said quietly. My mother inhaled sharply. Hearing her first name from him seemed to answer a question neither of us had asked aloud. "You know each other," I whispered. Ethan stepped inside after my mother nodded. The apartment suddenly felt very small. He removed his coat and remained standing near the doorway while my mother slowly returned to the table. Nobody seemed sure where to begin. Finally, Ethan reached into a leather portfolio he had carried with him. He placed several documents on the table. "I found these in my father's private records." My eyes moved toward the papers. Old contracts, letters, financial reports, decades old. Ethan looked at my mother. I did not know they existed. She studied the documents carefully. Her hands trembled slightly. Neither did I. Ethan lowered himself into a chair. "After my father passed away, most of his personal archives remained sealed. Last week, I authorized a full review." He glanced toward me. "That is when I found your mother's name." My pulse quickened. Ethan opened one of the folders. Inside was a photograph identical to the one I had seen in the library. My mother standing beside Richard Blackwood. Both smiling. Both much younger. "My father never told me the entire story," Ethan said. "Only fragments." My mother looked down at the photograph. A faint sadness crossed her face. Because he was trying to protect people. Ethan nodded slowly. That is exactly what I eventually discovered. The room became quiet again. Outside, a passing car sent reflections across the ceiling. Ethan turned another page. 24 years ago, your husband worked for Blackwood Construction. My mother closed her eyes briefly. Yes. There was an accident at one of the company's sites. Ethan's voice softened. My father was responsible for approving safety corrections that had been delayed. My stomach tightened. My mother remained silent. Ethan continued. When the accident happened, your husband prevented several workers from being injured, including my father. I stared at him. My father saved Richard Blackwood? Ethan nodded. He did. My mother looked away toward the window. Tears glistened in her eyes. Your father never wanted recognition, she said quietly. He believed helping people was simply the right thing to do. Ethan's expression grew thoughtful. My father never forgot it. He opened the final folder. Inside was a document signed by Richard Blackwood himself. A legal declaration. Ethan placed it directly in front of me. Because according to these records, my father spent the rest of his life trying to repay a debt he believed he could never fully repay. I looked down at the signature, then at the final sentence written beneath it. And the moment I read those words, everything changed. The sentence at the bottom of the document was only 14 words long, but it felt powerful enough to silence the entire room. If circumstances ever allow, the Miller family shall always be under Blackwood protection. I read it twice, then a third time. The signature beneath it belonged to Richard Blackwood. My mother covered her mouth with one trembling hand. Ethan remained quiet, giving both of us time to absorb what we had just discovered. Protection? I finally whispered. What does that even mean? My mother looked down at the papers. For a moment, she seemed 20 years younger and infinitely more tired. It means he never forgot your father. Ethan slowly nodded. My father kept records of every attempt he made to help your family. He opened another folder. Inside were letters, financial proposals, housing assistance requests, scholarship recommendations. All unsigned, all rejected. Confused, I looked toward my mother. You turned them down? She gave a small nod. Most of them. Why? Her eyes met mine. Because your father would have hated feeling like a debt. Silence settled over the apartment once again. I thought about the years we had spent struggling. The bills. The extra jobs. The uncertainty. Part of me wanted to be frustrated. Another part understood exactly why she had made those choices. Ethan carefully organized the papers into neat stacks. There is more. His voice sounded heavier now. My stomach tightened. More. There always seemed to be more. Ethan removed a final envelope from the portfolio. Unlike the others, this one looked newer. Recently opened. He stared at it for several seconds before speaking. I found this inside my father's private safe. My mother immediately recognized it. I could see it in her face. No. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Ethan looked surprised. You know what this is? She closed her eyes. I hoped it had been destroyed. Every nerve in my body suddenly felt alert. Ethan slid the document across the table. I reached for it carefully. The first page contained legal records, property transfers, corporate acquisitions, business restructuring agreements. None of it made immediate sense. Then I saw a familiar address. My apartment building. My pulse stopped. The room seemed to tilt slightly beneath me. What is this? I asked. Ethan exhaled slowly. 22 years ago, Blackwood Holdings acquired the company that owned your family's original home. My mother lowered her head. Ethan. He continued anyway. Several months later, the property was redeveloped. I looked between them. Neither appeared willing to say the next words. Suddenly I understood why. Because according to the documents in my hands, the reason my family lost everything was connected directly to the company that eventually became Ethan's empire. My chest tightened. Every conversation, every act of kindness, every discovery from the past suddenly felt different. Ethan looked at me with complete honesty. No excuses, no defenses, just truth. Grace, he said quietly. I think my family may have caused more damage than either of us realized. The words settled over the room like a storm cloud. Nobody spoke. The rain outside had slowed to a gentle rhythm against the glass, but inside the apartment, everything felt unbearably still. I stared at the documents spread across the table and tried to make sense of what I was seeing. Part of me wanted to push them away. Another part wanted answers. Tell me everything, I said quietly. Ethan did not hesitate. I spent the last week reviewing records from that period. At first, I believed the acquisition was routine. Then I found correspondence my father kept hidden. He opened another file and slid several letters toward me. The pages were yellowed with age. Richard Blackwood's handwriting covered every line. He fought against the redevelopment plan, Ethan said. My eyes lifted to his. What? Ethan nodded. The decision came from the board. The company was expanding rapidly. Several properties were targeted for redevelopment, including the one your family lived in. My mother looked away. Pain flickered across her face. Richard tried to stop it. Ethan continued. He argued that families would suffer. He lost the vote. The room fell silent again. For years I had imagined corporations as giant machines without faces. Now those decisions suddenly had names. People. Histories. Regrets. Ethan turned another page. Afterward, my father spent years trying to help your family privately. Not because he felt responsible for your father's actions. Because he felt responsible for his own. My mother wiped at her eyes. That sounds like him. I looked between them. You knew him well. It was not a question anymore. My mother gave a small smile. Sad but genuine. Richard was one of the few wealthy men who never treated people like numbers. Ethan lowered his gaze briefly. I wish I had known that version of him better. Something in his voice caught my attention. Not guilt. Grief. The kind that never completely disappeared. For the first time, I realized this discovery was affecting him too. He was not defending his family. He was confronting it. The realization softened something inside me. Ethan closed the folder and leaned back slightly. There is one more thing. My stomach tightened. I was beginning to hate those words. He reached into the portfolio and removed a sealed envelope. Unlike the others, this one carried my father's name across the front. My breath caught instantly. That is impossible. My mother stared at it in shock. I have not seen that in 20 years. Ethan carefully placed it in front of us. My father never mailed it. Nobody moved. The envelope sat on the table like a forgotten piece of history waiting to be opened. My hands trembled as I reached for it. The paper felt fragile beneath my fingertips. Whatever was inside had remained hidden for more than 2 decades. A message frozen in time. A final truth waiting to be heard. And as I slowly broke the seal, I realized that everything we had discovered so far might only be the beginning. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the letter. The paper crackled softly in the silence. For a moment, nobody spoke. Not me. Not my mother. Not Ethan. The only sound came from the rain outside and the steady ticking of the old clock above the stove. Then I began to read. To Thomas Miller, if you are reading this, then I have waited too long to say what should have been said years ago. I stopped breathing. The handwriting matched the signatures in every document Ethan had shown us. Richard Blackwood. I continued reading. You saved my life. That fact has never left me for a single day. I have spent years trying to repay a debt that cannot be measured in money, property, or influence. Some debts belong to the heart. My mother lowered her eyes. Tears glistened beneath the kitchen light. The letter continued. When the board approved the redevelopment project, I failed your family. I argued against it. I fought it. But in the end, I lacked the courage to walk away from the company that carried my name. That failure belongs to me. Not to my employees. Not to my partners. To me alone. The words hit harder than I expected. Not because they erased the past. They did not. But because they sounded honest. Painfully honest. I kept reading. If circumstances ever bring our families together again, I hope they meet not as debtor and creditor, but as equals. No one should spend a lifetime carrying guilt. No one should spend a lifetime carrying resentment. Both are prisons. Silence filled the apartment. Ethan stared at the table. His jaw tightened slightly. I wondered if he had already memorized every word. The final paragraph felt different. More personal. More urgent. If my son ever discovers this letter, I ask only one thing. Finish what I could not. Do what is right, even when it is difficult. Especially when it is difficult. The room became completely still. Slowly, I lowered the letter. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then my mother reached across the table and gently touched the paper. That sounds exactly like him, she whispered. Ethan looked away toward the rain-covered window. For the first time since arriving, uncertainty appeared in his eyes. I do not know if I can fix what happened, he admitted quietly. Some things cannot be fixed. I looked at him. He was not speaking as a billionaire. Not as the head of a company. Just as a man carrying a responsibility he never asked for. Maybe not, I said softly. But you are trying. His eyes lifted to mine. Something passed between us then. Not obligation. Not guilt. Understanding. Real understanding. My mother stood slowly and moved toward the window. Your father would have liked him, she said unexpectedly. Ethan blinked in surprise. So did I? She smiled faintly. Because he is asking the same question your father always asked. Ethan looked genuinely confused. What question? My mother turned back toward us. Not what can I gain. What is the right thing to do? The apartment fell quiet again. Yet for the first time all evening, the weight in the room felt lighter. Not gone. Just lighter. Then Ethan reached into his portfolio one final time and removed a thin folder neither of us had seen before. He placed it carefully on the table. There is one more thing I need to show you. And the moment I saw the address printed across the front cover, my heart stopped. Because it was the address of the apartment building where my mother and I still lived. The folder remained closed for several seconds. I could hear my own heartbeat. The address printed on the cover belonged to the building that had been my home for nearly my entire life. The same building Ethan had been researching. The same building scheduled for sale. Slowly, Ethan opened the folder and slid the documents toward me. I scanned the first page. Then the second. Then the third. None of it made sense at first. Property transfer agreements. Renovation budgets. Community development plans. My eyes moved to the final page. That was when I saw the signature. Ethan Blackwood. I looked up immediately. What is this? Ethan folded his hands together. 3 days ago, I purchased the property. Silence filled the apartment. My mother stared at him. I stared at him. Neither of us spoke. Ethan continued before either of us could respond. The original redevelopment proposal was canceled this morning. I blinked. Canceled? He nodded. Nobody is being forced to leave. My throat tightened unexpectedly. You bought the building. Yes. For us. Ethan shook his head. For everyone. The answer sounded exactly like something his father would have written in that letter. My mother smiled softly through her tears. Ethan pointed to another page. The renovation project will begin next year. Existing residents will remain. Rent increases are restricted for 10 years. Community services will be expanded. The medical clinic on the corner will receive funding. I looked down at the documents again. Every line reflected careful planning. Not charity. Opportunity. Stability. A future. Suddenly I understood why he had waited to show us. Because this was never about paying a debt. It was about correcting a mistake. The rain had stopped completely by then. Moonlight filtered through the apartment window. For the first time in years, the future felt larger than the walls around us. Ethan stood and gathered his coat. I should go. Neither my mother nor I moved. At the door, he paused. Then he turned toward me. The uncertainty I had seen earlier was still there. But so was something else. Hope. Grace. My name sounded different now. Familiar. Honest. There is something I need to say. My pulse quickened. Ethan glanced briefly toward my mother. She smiled and quietly disappeared into the kitchen, giving us privacy, giving us space. Ethan looked back at me. When I first noticed you, I thought I was meeting someone extraordinary. A faint smile touched his face. I was wrong. I laughed softly. That is not usually how compliments work. No. His eyes never left mine. Because what I eventually realized was that you are not extraordinary because of what you do. The room felt very still. You are extraordinary because of who you are. Emotion caught unexpectedly in my chest. Ethan took a slow breath. You taught me something my father spent years trying to learn. I swallowed carefully. What is that? His smile deepened slightly. That dignity matters more than power. Neither of us spoke after that. We did not need to. Some moments were too important for unnecessary words. 1 year later, the renovated community center opened its doors. My mother stood beside me. Children filled the courtyard. Families laughed. The clinic expanded. The neighborhood thrived. Everything looked brighter, stronger, alive. Across the crowd, Ethan walked toward me. No cameras, no reporters, no grand gestures. Just the man who had chosen to do the right thing when it mattered most. He stopped in front of me and smiled. If I had to do it all again, he said softly, I would still walk into that ballroom. I smiled back. Good. Why? His eyes sparkled with curiosity. I reached for his hand. Because that was the night 2 families finally stopped carrying the past and started building a future. And standing there beneath the afternoon sun, I realized something beautiful. Wealth had not changed my life. Kindness had. And sometimes the most valuable thing a person can offer is not what they own, but but the choice to see someone who thought they were invisible.